The painter and amateur archaeologist Flinders Petrie discovers a strange artifact in the ruins of the ancient Egyptian city of Abydos.
And we're starting off this list with encephalitis lethargica, also known as the sleeping sickness. This strange ailment swept across the world between 1917 and 1928, leaving medical professionals baffled and horrified. The epidemic affected millions of people with symptoms ranging from mild lethargy to severe cases of catatonia, where individuals would become completely motionless and unresponsive, almost like statues. The cause of the disease remained elusive as doctors struggled to find a definitive explanation for its origin and transmission. During the height of the epidemic, patients were observed in a trance-like state, often remaining immobile for weeks or even years. Some victims also experienced psychiatric symptoms such as hallucinations and delirium, and scientists had several theories, including viral infections or exposure to toxins, but none could provide a definitive explanation. The epidemic gradually subsided by the late 1920s, with sporadic cases occurring afterward, and that might be the strangest thing about this one. It seemed to just flare up and then disappear. Next up, we have Overton Bridge. Fair warning, if you ever find yourself in Scotland with your pet dog, do not take it to this bridge. Dogs seem to really enjoy leaping off of it. Overton Bridge, located near Dumbarton in Scotland, has gained quite the reputation due to its mysterious phenomenon associated with it. For decades, the bridge has been the site of a large number of dog deaths. They just leap off the bridge, and as to why they do so, no one knows. The peculiar incidents date back to the 1950s, with over 50 dogs reportedly plunging from the same spot on the bridge. Even more strange is that dogs typically jump from the same side as well. Numerous theories have been proposed to try and explain the mystery surrounding the bridge. Some speculate that there may be an undetectable scent or maybe a sound that only dogs can hear that lures them to jump. Others have suggested supernatural or paranormal explanations, of course, but it still remains a mystery. Even after investigations, including studies by animal behaviorists and structural engineers. Number 8, the disappearance of Malaysian Airlines Flight 370. It's a very famous one. This has to be the most perplexing aviation mystery in recent history. On March 8th of 2014, the Boeing 777 with 239 passengers and crew members on board seemed to vanish without a trace. The flight was en route from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing when just a little under an hour after takeoff, it disappeared from radar screens, leaving behind no distress signals or communication indicating any issues on board. The search for Flight 370 started in the Gulf of Thailand and the South China Sea, which was when the captain, Zahari Ahmad Shah, last made contact with air traffic control before the plane disappeared from screens. It was soon discovered that the plane actually made a sharp turn, redirecting its route completely, flying for several hours before it would have eventually run out of fuel over the vast expanse of the southern Indian Ocean, where satellite data suggested the plane had likely gone down. Despite extensive efforts involving multiple countries and cutting-edge technology, though, no wreckage was initially found. Of course, a bunch of theories started being proposed. Possible mechanical failure, the captain deciding to take his own life, as well as the crew, conspiracy theories involving government cover-ups, even a UFO abduction. The disappearance of Flight 370 has left the families of the victims behind, desperate for some kind of closure and resolution. And at number 7, we have the first Thanksgiving. This probably shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone, but this was not exactly the harmonious, peaceful breaking of bread that many history books played it out to be. The first Thanksgiving occurred in 1621 between English pilgrims who had recently arrived on the Mayflower and the Wampanoag Native Americans in Plymouth, Massachusetts. In the fall of 1621, the pilgrims celebrated their successful harvest with a feast. Chief Massasoit of the Wampanoag and around 90 of his men joined the pilgrims, but this event was not an act of friendship, but more of a political alliance. The Wampanoag had their own motivations for assisting the Pilgrims. Earlier, a devastating epidemic brought over by English settlers, likely smallpox, had decimated their population. And with their numbers reduced, they sought alliances with the English colonists to bolster their own security against rival tribes. During the feast, they provided most of the food, deer, fish, and other game. The Pilgrims contributed some of their own harvest, mostly vegetables. The event was more about diplomacy and survival than a harmonious gathering, and the relationship between the Pilgrims and the Native Americans quickly deteriorated in the years following that first Thanksgiving. More English settlers arrived who didn't care at all about any former alliance, and the Pilgrim population grew, taking over completely, often viewing the Native Americans as godless and wild, and tensions escalated over land and resources. Basically, the standard story is often romanticized. And at number 6, we have humans evolving from apes. So the idea that humans evolved directly from apes is a misconception. Humans and modern apes, like chimps and gorillas, share a common ancestor that lived approximately, 5-7 million years ago. This common ancestor was not identical to modern apes or humans, but possessed traits that we both kind of pulled from, and over millions of years, the evolutionary paths of humans and apes diverged, split off somewhere. So we both evolved separately, adapting to different environments, gaining our own unique physical and behavioral traits. Around 4 to 2 million years ago, the earliest human ancestors, known as Australopithecus, appeared in Africa. They walked upright on 2 legs, something that set them apart from other primates. Eventually, Homo sapiens came about, anatomically similar to us modern humans, who emerged in Africa and gradually migrated out of Africa, eventually populating the entire world. And at number 5, we have a Christopher Columbus myth that he apparently discovered and proved that the Earth is round. Now, I'm just gonna stop this right now. The insane comments, I know I'm gonna get one. I'm gonna get one. Oh no, Earth is actually flat. It is flat. All right, listen, just save it. I don't want to hear it. I will save you the time. Fine, I am an idiotic, blind sheep for believing that the Earth being round is just a lie perpetrated by the New World Order, who are for some reason hiding the fact that the Earth is actually flat. To what end? I don't know. Anyway, in some school curriculums, at least back in the day, the story is that Europeans all thought the Earth was flat and that Columbus sailed out in order to prove everyone wrong, or that he made the discovery that it actually isn't. Everyone knew at the time the Earth was flat, long before Columbus's time. So, yeah. Next up, we have Napoleon's height. Napoleon Bonaparte, a prominent military and political leader, rose to prominence during the French Revolution and played a big role in shaping the course of European history in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. In 1804, Napoleon declared himself Emperor of the French, establishing the First French Empire. His military campaigns expanded French dominion over much of Europe. He was the top dog for a long time, with successful battle after successful battle, becoming known as Napoleon the Great. But apparently, the dude was really short. At least that's what many of us have been led to believe. The myth is so widespread that there's a term for insecure short people who try to distract people from their lack of height by being extra boisterous or in your face. They apparently have a Napoleon complex. Well, Napoleon wasn't that short, at least not for the time. He was approximately 5'6", which was slightly above average for a Frenchman of his time. I'm 5'6.5", so I would have been a grade A stud back then. Number 3, lightning never strikes the same place twice. This is a lie. It absolutely can. And not just to buildings, but people too. So be careful. It is incredibly rare, but a United States park ranger in Virginia named Roy Sullivan had quite the life. He was plagued by lightning strikes, this poor man. Between 1942 and 1977, he was struck by lightning 7 times, earning him the nickname the Human Lightning Rod. So there you go. Next up, we have Christopher Columbus discovering America. I doubt that this is presented in schools now the same way it was back in the day. Even when I was in school, I learned that this was not the case. Might be different here in Canada than in the States though, and I'm sure state to state the curriculum is different. But the story goes that Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492, discovering a whole new world. The truth though is that it's not as clear-cut, aside from the fact, of course, that the Native Americans were already living there. That part is obvious. But even in terms of Europeans setting foot in North America, it's different than I'm sure many kids were taught in school back in the day. In reality, when Columbus made his journey, he didn't actually land in what we now know as the United States. Instead, he arrived in the Bahamas and later explored various Caribbean islands and parts of Central and South America. So while Columbus did stumble upon previously unknown lands, from a European perspective anyway, he never set foot on the shores of North America. And long before Columbus packed his bags, there was another adventurer on the scene, Leif Erikson, a Viking explorer from Iceland. Around the year 1000 AD, Erikson and his crew sailed across the Atlantic and reached a place he called Vinland, which is believed to be Newfoundland, Canada. So when it comes to Europeans setting foot in North America, Erikson beat Columbus to the punch by about 500 years. And finally, we have the story that Abe Lincoln was an entirely righteous and heroic figure. I'm not trying to downplay all the good that he did. He deserves the praise. But his motives didn't stem purely from a sense of justice. He became president in 1861. He assumed office during a critical period in American history as the nation was on the brink of civil war over issues like slavery and states' rights. One of Lincoln's most notable achievements was his role in preserving the Union during the American Civil War. His leadership during this conflict, which resulted in the abolition of slavery, is often highlighted as a defining moment in his legacy, which absolutely fair, but he's often portrayed as this righteous hero in the education system, which is an oversimplification. While he played a major role in the abolition of slavery, his views on race and equality weren't so cut and dry. Lincoln's main goal during the Civil War was to preserve the Union. His motivation was mostly political and aimed at keeping border states loyal to the Union. Lincoln was quoted as saying even, "If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do that."
Kicking off our list at number 10, the reindeer gift. We'll turn the clocks back to 1941 right off the hop. When the Germans were attacking the Soviet Union, it was of course one of the biggest attacks in history. Britain and the United States had to send over weapons, supplies, anything really just to keep them afloat, just to keep them in the fight. Now they sent these supplies through the Arctic Circle, that was the only route, but of course it was littered with U-boats, you know, war stuff. So thankfully the British HMS Trident was there to watch the waters, and in turn the Soviets were able to fight on. As a gift, as a thank you rather, the Soviets sent the captain of the Trident, they sent him a live reindeer that the British of course had to accept because it was ill-mannered if you don't. So they had to keep a 6-foot tall, real-life living reindeer on a submarine. Must be comfortable, awesome. Imagine the smell. Her name was Pollyanna and they brought her on board through a torpedo tube. She was tiny, she's the cutest little thing. She was a crew member for 6 weeks, which is honestly hilarious because you know some of those guys got way too attached, you know for sure. She slept better than most, if I'm being honest. She shared her room in the captain's quarters. Again, imagine the smell. I don't know, is it worth it? I've always wanted a baby goat growing up, so this is kind of the closest thing. I'm jealous, I'm weirdly jealous. Number 9, Stalin Photoshop. Deep fakes are getting out of hand. I have no idea what's real or what's fake anymore. To be honest, I'm not even Taylor. I'm actually Olivia doing a list right now, but it's been deep faked so well that you believe it. Modern technology is really making it hard to tell what's real and what's not, but it goes back. Back in 1939, a photo of Stalin was published, and he looks normal. He actually looks kind of great. Some would say he looks way too good. You know what I mean? He was touching up photos as far back as 1939, just airbrushing, just digitally removing all those zits and stuff. Like really? That far back? But even if you got a photo with Stalin, there's a chance that you yourself would be digitally removed. Like Nikolai Yevtsov, for example, the leader of the NKVD. He was in a photo with Stalin, but around 1937, Nikolai was responsible for orders that had over 1 million people arrested. So it wasn't ideal to be in a photo with Nikolai at the time. So he was denounced, imprisoned, and he died in 1940. So Stalin had him digitally erased and replaced in a photo. That's pretty hilarious. I don't know, this man was ahead of his time via Photoshop. How did he do it? How did they do it? No one knows. Number 8, Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky. Nice, I remember this one. I heard about this on LimeWire. That was cool. Heard about that at full volume. This was a huge presidential scandal. Back when you didn't happen every other week and stuff, this was a big deal. It was 1998 and Clinton's White House intern Monica Lewinsky was 22 years old at the time. Yeah, young. When you think back to all this old history, you're like, oh, they were this. No, very young, extremely young. They had a from 1995 to 1997, despite what LimeWire told us. Lewinsky said she hooked up with Bill 9 different times at the White House, and apparently, according to her schedule, Hillary Clinton was at the White House for at least 7 of those times. She's like, what's going on in there, huh? Is that my... Who is that?
The Mary Celeste. All right, we have a ghost ship on the list. It's December 4th, 1872. A ship is found floating in the Atlantic Ocean, completely empty. Empty of crew and passengers, that is. Everything else was intact. All the cargo remained, and there was no damage to the vessel. The only thing missing was a single lifeboat. The ship had set sail from New York 1 month prior, led by Captain Benjamin Briggs, along with his wife, daughter, and 7 other crew members. To this day, nobody knows how or why everyone went missing. Some speculated that the ship could have been attacked by pirates, but there was no sign of a struggle, and the last entry on the ship's daily log was completely ordinary. There were no signs that anything was amiss. It seemed as if everyone had just boarded the lifeboat and sailed off, never to be seen or heard from again. And at number 6, we have the deaths of the Jameson family. Bobby Dale Jameson, his wife Sherilyn, and their 6-year-old daughter Madison vanished without a trace while on a trip to the rugged terrain of the San Bois Mountains in Oklahoma. The family's truck was discovered abandoned, and inside were their personal belongings, including wallets, $32,000 in cash, IDs, and their dog, who was fortunately still alive. There was no sign of a struggle in the truck, although police did find an 11-page hate letter written by Sherilyn to her husband. There was also surveillance footage taken outside of the Jamesons' home showing them making a number of trips from their property to the truck back and forth. They seemed to be moving in an almost trance-like state. So there were just so many ways that this thing could have gone, and it was impossible for authorities to actually figure out exactly what happened. The search for the Jameson family spanned months and involved extensive resources, but no sign of them was found until 4 years later, when the skeletal remains of the family was found just 3 miles from where their truck had been discovered. Authorities were never able to determine the cause of death, as their bodies were too decomposed, and to this day the circumstances surrounding their deaths are all but a mystery. Number 5, the feet mystery. Sounds pretty innocuous, but it's actually pretty disturbing. Since 2007, the discovery of severed feet along the coastlines of British Columbia have been found and remains a perplexing and eerie phenomenon till this day. The first severed foot was discovered by a young girl, of all people, in August of 2007 on Jedediah Island, and since then a total of 21 feet have been found in various locations along the coast. Speculation and theories have arisen, ranging from accidents at sea, of course foul play. Authorities have stated that they ruled out foul play, though, proposing that the feet most likely belonged to people who either took their own lives or died in accidents, and that the feet simply separated from the natural decomposition process, and then because they were in shoes, they remained buoyant and somewhat preserved until they finally floated onto shore. Extensive investigations examining missing persons cases, forensic analysis, and DNA testing were done, but there have still been no definitive answers. Number 4, the Flannan Isles Lighthouse Keepers. Located on a remote island off the coast of Scotland, this lighthouse was manned by 3 experienced keepers, James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur. On December 15th, a passing ship noticed that the lighthouse's light was not shining. A relief vessel was sent to investigate, only to find the island deserted and the keepers nowhere to be found. The lighthouse's door was unlocked, and a meal lay unfinished. perched on the table as if the keepers had just vanished abruptly out of thin air. Strangely, the logbook contained weird entries from December 12th describing severe storms and the men's increasingly erratic behavior. One entry mentioned something unusual, but its meaning was never deciphered. Various theories have emerged to explain the Flannan Isles lighthouse keepers' disappearance. Some speculate that they were swept away in a storm, others suggest foul play, and of course, with any unexplained event like this, some think there could be a ghost in the mix. Until this day, though, no conclusive evidence or an explanation has ever been found. The mysterious deaths at Dyatlov Pass. In late January of 1959, a group of 10 hikers led by Igor Dyatlov set out on a challenging trek through the Ural Mountains in Soviet Russia. Tragically, their expedition took a horrific turn, apparently. When the hikers failed to report back as planned, a search party was sent out. What they discovered at Dyatlov Pass was a scene of utter terror. The hikers' tent had been torn open from the inside. The group's belongings were left behind, and the search continued. The bodies of the hikers were found scattered in the surrounding area, some partially clothed and exhibiting horrifying injuries. Some victims had fractured skulls, crushed chest, or unexplained internal injuries, as if subjected to extreme force. Some theories point to an avalanche or severe weather conditions, while others suggest a possible attack of some kind. I think possible is a bit of an understatement there. They were obviously attacked by someone or something. Some people even think, maybe it was UFOs or a Yeti. However, none of these theories have ever been proven. The death of Mary Reeser. In the early morning hours of July 2nd in Petersburg, Florida, Mary's landlord arrived at her apartment with a telegraph, only to discover that the doorknob was hot to the touch. So she phoned the police. Firefighters arrived on the scene. However, what they discovered inside defied all logic and explanation. Amidst the charred remains of a chair the widow had been sitting on was Mary's body, which had been reduced to a pile of ash, with only a portion of her left foot remaining intact. There's a photo of that online, by the way, if you feel like Googling it. Pretty disturbing. The strangest part of the case was that the surrounding area, including the furniture, nearby objects, even a stack of newspapers, was just unscathed by the fire that had consumed her body completely. Forensic experts were utterly confused by the area of the fire's impact. It seemed to have solely targeted Mary Reeser's body, while sparing everything else in the room. Of course, theories and speculation began to spread, including the controversial concept of spontaneous human combustion, which I always smile when I say, because it reminds me of Spinal Tap, but it would be horrifying if it actually happened in real life, as it might have here. I don't know. This theory suggests that individuals can suddenly just burst into flames without an external ignition source. Pretty weird. Finally, though, we have one of my favorite UFO abduction accounts, the Travis Walton case. On November 5th, 1975, Travis and his crew of fellow loggers were working in the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest in Arizona. They claimed to witness strange lights in the sky as they were driving back from their work site, and as they got closer to the light, they spotted a large glowing object hovering above the trees. Curiosity got the better of them, and Travis got out of the truck and approached the craft. The other guys were pleading with him to come back to the truck, and then all of a sudden Travis was hit by a beam of light and seemingly lifted into the air. Panicked and frightened, the remaining loggers just fled the scene, leaving Travis behind. They soon decided, though, to turn back and retrieve him, but Travis was no longer there. They later reported the incident to local authorities, sparking, of course, a search for Travis, which lasted for 5 days. Astonishingly, Travis reappeared unharmed, but deeply traumatized, recounting a bizarre tale of abduction and encounters with extraterrestrial beings. Short, bald, black eyes, your classic kind of gray alien. Makes this case even more interesting, though, is the corroboration by Travis's fellow loggers. All of them confirmed witnessing the same strange craft and the beam of light that struck Travis. They even took lie detector tests that all came back saying they were telling the truth, or at least believed that they had seen what they had seen. Now, polygraph tests They're not always 100% credible, but it is interesting that all of them came back positive. Also, there is a movie about the Travis Walton case called Fire in the Sky. Very creepy movie, so if you're interested in this case at all, definitely check that one out.
Starting us off in the number 10 spot is Cell Block D. One of the most well-known prisons in history is the island penitentiary of Alcatraz. And although much of what went on there was horrific, Cell Block D was where some of the most cruel tortures took place. Cell Block D, often referred to as the Hole, held the solitary confinement cells and was reserved for the most poorly behaved inmates. There were 5 cells in the area, each freezing cold, and prisoners forced to these confines would be required to strip naked and would only get a small mattress to sleep on at night. Then during the day, the mattress was removed and they were left in a cold and empty room to suffer. One cell in particular, however, was viewed as the most feared, as on top of the others, it was also pitch black with only a hole in the floor for them to relieve themselves. But during the 1940s is when it became truly terrifying. One day an inmate was sent to the pitch black cell and immediately began screaming as soon as he was locked in. But the guards ignored him, as they were used to such things happening. However, to their horror, the next morning they found the inmate dead inside the cell with a terrified look plastered across his face. What's even stranger is that the autopsy revealed he had died of strangulation that in no way could have been self-inflicted. Whoever or whatever took his life was never figured out. But every other prisoner or guard alike that has set foot in the cell says the same thing. They wish they never had. Coming in at number 9, a nurse's story. One prison nurse named KLC223 posted to Reddit revealing the most terrifying thing that ever happened to them on the job. Quote, sometimes severely aggressive or mentally unstable inmates were placed in the chair. It's basically a big black chair that after the inmate is handcuffed, legs and feet, he is then tied to this chair to contain them. Because this risks their circulation being cut off, a nurse was required to be present to check pulses every 15 minutes in hands and feet. They were let out of the chair every 2 hours for a 15-minute period to walk around the cell. She then goes on to explain one inmate who was very combative and who officers decided a chair would be required. Quote, the 2-hour time frame was reached to let him out to walk the cell. As soon as he had his handcuffs unlocked, he went completely insane, biting the officers in the arms and shoulders and headbutting them as well as punching them in the face. I had to run out of the cell and back off as quickly as I could. I managed to get out fine, but the officers had to restrain him immediately again. All 5 had to go to the hospital for either broken bones, stitches, or chunks bitten out of their arms. It was all pretty horrific. Coming in at number 8, Rikers Island. Even though I know intellectually that there is lots of corruption inside the prison system, sometimes I am still shocked at just how messed up it all can be. Particularly when it comes to treating the inmates as if they're some kind of pawn in a game. Back in 2008, 3 inmates were charged with the manslaughter of fellow Rikers Island prisoner Christopher Robinson, allegedly pummeling him to death because he refused to join a fight club. But the worst part of this entire ordeal is that the fight club in question was supervised by correctional officers. Apparently 3 guards oversaw a scheme that was referred to as the program and have been accused of ordering inmate enforcers called the team to beat up other detainees. So it's not just that the 18-year-old Robinson refused to be a part of a fight club amongst inmates, he refused to have a part in a guard-run fight ring, and sadly he lost his life because of it. It's honestly so beyond messed up that this kind of stuff is happening.
Number 7, adhesive bras. We'll liven this up a little bit with some vintage history it's kind of funny. It's pretty funny. Let's talk about sticky bras, shall we? What a mess this was, oh my. Back in 1949, Life magazine released an article that caught everybody's attention, obviously. This was news, this was like a new technology that was being announced. It was May 16th, 1949, and the article read, for 5,000 years, clothes have been draped, tied, buttoned, pinned, and buckled on the human form. This year, for the first time in history, drumroll, they will be glued on. What in the world? How? This is witchcraft. How did that happen? Just 1, 2, that's it? That's easy. Inventor Charles Langs changed the game, or he thought he did, in 1949. He made these bra cups that would stick to you with adhesive. This, special glue. This specific adhesive was promised to leave behind no residue, it was supposed to be painless, yet at the same time stay glued on even if you were to jump into a pool from a 10-foot diving board. That was the sell. Yeah, well, that's not true. That's definitely not true. Well, Langs ended up selling the company to Textron later on, and the product ultimately failed. Number 6, nuclear site list. All right, back to the dark stuff. Here on Most Amazing, we love lists, right? I'm not sure if you can tell. Smash that thumbs up, hit subscribe, yada yada. We love it. But apparently, the US government also fancies a list or two. Who thought? Back when Obama was still running the show, a report was delivered to Congress, or rather, it was supposed to be. The 266-page report featuring, every nook and cranny about the US nuclear program. It was released publicly on the government printing office's website in draft form. Draft form, couldn't have been easier, just a casual PDF that shows us maps with stockpiled fuel used for nuclear warheads. Awesome, right next to your resume. Imagine that, so convenient. How does this even happen? I thought this type of stuff could never happen, right? Well, MIT professor John M. Deutsch said that these screw-ups do of course happen, and it's normal, and this one here isn't a serious breach. I mean, it certainly sounds serious, but okay. We'll just have to trust the government. Number 5, UFOs in the ocean. This video here was leaked in the last couple of years. You've probably seen it, hopefully not. This would be a great day. The footage itself was recorded in 2019 in San Diego. Now the Pentagon has since of course confirmed its authenticity, and the UAP, the unidentified aerial phenomenon here, is sphere-shaped and it's flying at extremely high speeds. There's no exhaust, no propulsion system whatsoever. It's just a metal ball whipping by San Diego, and now we're questioning our beliefs, so that's fun. The sphere vanished into the water afterwards, into the ocean, and then was never seen ever again. Number 4, radar footage. Now normally when we see leaked footage, be it of UAPs or leaked documents, whatever, it's always the worst quality. Like that one, not the best, right? Not quite 4K. It's hard to believe when military footage is poor quality, right? Like how can we see photos of black holes and not even have a photo of a UAP yet, right? What's going on here? Well, Jeremy Corbell, he's here to help. Jeremy? What if he just walked in? That would be crazy. He's not here. That's insane. Jeremy took to Twitter in May 2021 sharing footage of US Navy ships being swarmed by UFOs. Like more than one. Sorry, UAPs. We're not going to call them that anymore. Now this time we have radar footage, and that's pretty sweet. That's different. It came from the Combat Information Center aboard the USS Omaha. The 46-second clip was originally recorded July 15th, 2019. You can even hear people in the background reacting to what's happening in real time. You hear panic in their voices. These military personnel in the background, you can overhear them talking about how fast the objects are moving on the radar. So, seems very believable this time, right? It's not just a grainy footage. It's like a live reaction kind of. And if he's spooked, we're spooked, right? Number 3, Watergate. I have to include Watergate, right? It's one of the biggest scandals in US history. Right in the middle of 1972, there were 5 men who were all arrested for breaking into the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate Hotel in Washington, D.C. It was clear that they intended on bugging the place, right? It was fishy, it was obvious, they looked like spy kids, right? They were up to no good. Now as the year went on, the election came closer and closer, and all of a sudden out of the woodwork comes this anonymous source who fed information to Washington Post that the Watergate bugging incident was a massive campaign of political spying and sabotage kicked off by none other than President Nixon himself. It was kicked off by his re-election and directed by officials of the White House. It was a whole planned thing. Now despite this information leak and it being reported to the news, Nixon was still re-elected. Now these men were clearly linked to a fundraising group for Nixon, but his administration just kept denying any involvement, right? That's the key. Deny, deny, deny. It wasn't until later that year in 1972 when reporters Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward, they came forward and exposed everything. Now we got the truth. They exposed the administrator's role in the entire scandal, how they had an inside source, an FBI agent named Mark Felt. It was a whole thing. This ultimately led to Nixon resigning in 1974, the first ever president to do so. Yeah, that's how you know you got caught, when you have to resign. Know what I mean? Number 2, shadow brokers. Back in August 2016, a group named the Shadow Brokers were the talk of the town. And with that name, how can you not be, right? The shadow brokers would steal cyber weapons from an NSA hacking unit and then proceed to sell them online to the highest bidder. Now this sounds made up. This sounds like it's from a movie. This is crazy, right? Now these tools in question, these cyber weapons, they've been used by many countries and many not so great sounding schemes. China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, you name it, these cyber attacks can happen anywhere, right? The 2019 ransomware cyber attack, that's one example. This incident was connected to the shadow brokers. So whoever this mysterious group is, it still remains a mystery and still sounds made up as shit. Sounds like a DC Comics villain. It's insane. And finally, number 1, motorized roller skates. We'll end on a fun one, because, you know, why not? This last one they've been working on for a very long time and we still can't crack it, right? This is the craziest thing I've ever seen working on this channel, so I gotta end with it. Motorized roller skates, what a nightmare this would be. Imagine if this worked out. Even Elon Musk would see this and be like, no, that's crazy. This photo was taken at the Sunoco station in Hartford, Connecticut. Now, context aside, this is an odd one. A guy with a briefcase is filling up at the gas station and he's wearing roller skates. That would look bad today. You would have SWAT teams rolling up if you saw that, right? It's 1956 and that futuristic looking man right there is Mike Dreschler. Now, at the time, he was working for a Detroit skate company, but he was very close to gas-powered skates. They would have cost around $250, which today is around $2,400. And its max speed was 17 miles an hour. Again, imagine that in the closing act of like a Mission Impossible movie. That's crazy. Now obviously the public wasn't supposed to see this. They feared that it would encourage folks to get creative on their own and, you know, launch their way to work. So yeah, don't make rocket skates with gasoline. Thanks.
Coming in at number 10 is gold juice. Recently, controversies surrounding gold juice ignited after actor Taryn Manning appeared on Whitney Cummings' podcast, where she made a shocking claim about how she was offered gold juice 3 times during her career. Her statements raised many eyebrows as she talked about how many Hollywood stars achieve immense success primarily because of the gold juice. Claiming how she refused to take it multiple times, the Orange is the New Black star discussed the alleged potion at length when she was asked if she had wished to attain unimaginable heights in her acting career. She then brought up the topic of the alleged juice and said, "I didn't drink it, I didn't want it," calling it scary, and also talked about why she feels terrified of the drink. She said the gold juice supposedly lets you have everything you want, all the fame in the world, and all the money. While many on social media believe the gold juice is made up of plasma and human blood, others made up conspiracy theories and stated how this could be a metaphor for the Illuminati. Regardless, this was probably something she shouldn't have said, and hopefully she doesn't get in trouble for it. Number 7. What happened to Shelley Miscavige? Shelley Miscavige is a member of the Church of Scientology's Sea Org who married Scientology leader David Miscavige. She was last seen in public in August of 2007. Now, since her disappearance, she has been the subject of speculation and inquiries regarding her whereabouts and well-being. In 2012, attorneys who said they represented her responded by saying that she was merely living a private life devoted to the Church of Scientology. Now, some former Sea Org members have said they believe Shelley is being held against her will at the compound of the Scientology's Church of Spiritual Technology Corporation near the mountain town of Running Springs in San Bernardino County, California. In August 2013, actress Leah Remedy, a former Scientologist and critic of the organization, filed a missing persons report regarding Shelley with the Los Angeles Police Department, which was closed within hours by the LAPD as unfounded. So where is Shelley? It seems like we might never know. Number 8. Blacklisted celebrities. It seems like celebrities in Hollywood that speak out on injustices get blacklisted from the industry. For example, Tippi Hedren became an actress after she was discovered by director Alfred Hitchcock while appearing on a television commercial in 1961. She achieved great praise for her work in his 2 films, The Birds and Marnie. Now, she was a star until she revealed that Hitchcock made offensive demands on her. She said, "He stared at me and simply said, as if it was the most natural thing in the world, that from this time on, he expected me to make myself sexually available and accessible to him however and whenever and wherever he wanted." Hitchcock's demands led to a horrible fight, according to her. She then told him Marnie would be their last film together, and later recalled how Hitchcock told her that he would destroy her career. He said, "I'll ruin your career," and he did ruin my career. He kept me under contract and paid me to do nothing for close to 2 years, she said. Now, this has happened to various actors, and it's just sad. Next up at number 7, Chow Room. So this one is definitely not the most cruel or barbaric one on the list, but it is definitely one of the more gross ones. Reddit user A Fake Fox posted talking about the wildest thing they saw while doing time, and I'm actually speechless. Quote, "There was a woman there who had tried to take out her own mother, so as revenge, while the mother was escaping, she ran her over, put it in reverse, floored it back over her again, and finally put it in drive over her one last time." But The gross part comes next. Quote, the daughter would always have her arms inside her shirt. You'd only see her arms when she was sitting, like eating or something. She's across from me one day eating, and I see her drop a pile of something. I immediately was like, what the F? You can't have this stuff in the chow hall. What is this girl doing? It was kind of loud when she dropped it, so it wasn't laundry. It looked kind of like meat. How and why does she have meat? We're eating spaghetti right now. Then it occurred to Reddit friend, it was her intestines and guts that had fallen out of the woman. Apparently they continued to fall on the floor, and she kept attempting to gather them up and put them back in her torso. I mean, I'm a little speechless, I won't lie. I hope this woman was taken to surgery. How was she alive? Next up at number 6, the Mamertine. The Romans were well known to be powerful, dangerous, and unafraid to kill off anyone who crossed their path. So it is probably not a huge shock that in the ancient world, the Romans also built and ran the most brutal prison of their time. The Mamertine was created sometime between 640 and 616 BC and was the only detention facility in the city at the time. While I can imagine that the entire prison was filled with incredibly cruel and awful torture, most of the horror stories derive from the lower room of the facility called the Tullianum. The Tullianum was located in a sewer system below the city and was designed for the criminals set to be executed, compared to the upper levels, which were reserved for inmates. The sewer floor, which was located 12 feet underground, made for incredibly dangerous and hazardous living for the prisoners, as they were left down there with no food or water until the fateful day of their hanging. However, sometimes if the crime was seen as especially bad, they would leave prisoners down in the Tullianum until they starved to death in the feces-infested dark pit. To make matters worse, it's also said that guards would usually toss dead bodies down there. I mean, it just sounds like maybe the most disgusting situation to be forced into for your last few days on Earth. Coming in at number 5, a taser. According to one Reddit user, NDR Dog, who spent time in a prison earlier on in their life, the most insane dark thing that they saw was the treatment of one inmate in particular. Quote, while I was being processed, one of the inmates was screaming non-stop about suing everyone and making the cops his B. He was still very under the influence. All the cops were generally laughing about it until one decided that it needed to stop, so they all suited up and went in to shut him up. They were more jacked than any high school football team I've ever seen. Off they went, and about 3 minutes later, silence. They walked me by his cell on the way to my new room, and he was just sitting there without clothes. A few hours go by, and he decides to end himself by drowning in the toilet. Well, in go about 8 cops in full gear. I would think 8 professional guards could move one guy, but they decided to taser him several times while his head is in a metal toilet and water. For 2 days, he just sat undressed on the floor, rocking back and forth with a blanket thrown over him. Then he just disappeared. First of all, tasering someone while their head is inside water? I will never understand how some guards get away with treating inmates this way. I'm also just scared to think too hard about where he might have disappeared off to. Coming in at number 4, ADX Florence. Located in Colorado, this supermax prison is dubbed by some as the Alcatraz of the Rockies and definitely has a few skeletons in its closet. One man in particular, named Harold Cunningham, in fact, was a part of a lawsuit against the penitentiary. Now, let's make one thing clear. You don't get into this prison unless you have committed some bad stuff. However, in Harold's case, what happened to him during his time at ADX only made matters worse. At first, Cunningham was sent to Marion and spent much of his time in the hole. However, he was prescribed medications that included antipsychotics due to a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia, among other mental health disorders. Then, in 2001, he was transferred from Marion over to ADX and was denied his medications. This, of course, escalated his behavior, and he became notorious for rule violations. But in his words, quote, I was treated and lived like an animal for years, stripped of all my clothes for weeks at a time, just a blanket chained to my bed. Water turned off, no shower at times, no food, and when they did feed me, it was bad food. Stale bread and cheese, rotten apples. I was beaten while handcuffed. All this on and off throughout 5 to 6 years. It was an up and down roller coaster ride in a bloody nightmare. I was at war physically and mentally. I survived, but now I suffer from PTSD, so it's hard for me to talk about some of the things I've been through. I mean, this man may not be innocent of his crimes, but the fact that they denied him prescribed medication and then kept adding on to his sentence for his behavior is wild to me. Coming in at number 3, Petoskey Prison. Built in the late 1930s, this penal facility mainly housed political prisoners during the communist reign in Romania. But what made this prison beyond cruel compared to others was their bizarre methods of torture, particularly what they called the re-education experiments. These re-education experiments took place between 1949 to 1951, and their goal was to brainwash prisoners into giving up their religious and political beliefs to the extent of altering their personalities until they displayed complete and total obedience. In total, roughly 500 prisoners were victims to these re-education experiments, which were really just mandated forms of psychological and physical torture. The first stage, referred to as external unmasking, involved torture disguised as interrogation until inmates divulged everything, often confessing to crimes they didn't even commit, just to make the torture stop. Next, the experiment began with what they called internal unmasking. The second stage forced prisoners into revealing the names of people who were lenient towards them during early interrogations. Then came the third and most brutal phase, known as public moral unmasking. The third phase involved public humiliation, usually in the form of coerced renouncing of their entire belief system. But it wasn't just forcing them to say something bad. One example of how they went forward with phase 3 involved dressing up Christians to look like Christ and turning them into forced blasphemy of sacred texts or religious symbols, going so far as to make them eat their own feces and call it Holy Communion. Thankfully, this chamber was closed down in 1952, and members of the experimental group were punished for their cruelties. Coming in our number 2 spot, the CIA. Back in 2014, it was publicly uncovered that the CIA had a program that was much more brutal than they had been inclined to let on. According to a document that was released called the Report, there was a very dark underbelly, much worse and with much less ineffective results than the CIA had previously let on. Many were detained under false pretenses, sometimes even by mistaken identity, and many were never a part of the hate groups the CIA claimed to be targeting. One man, Mohammed Ahmed al-Shouria Ben Soud, was brave enough to share his story. Soud was detained back in 2003 and said he was kidnapped from his home and remained in the facility for 16 months until he was released to a Libyan prison. Quote, "In my first interrogation shortly after having entered, I was brought in naked and stood there in the interrogation room. They removed the bag over my head. I found a female interrogator with the American intelligence saying to me in the harshest tone as she banged on the table, 'You are now a prisoner of the United States of America. You now have no rights.' Living conditions were hazardous. They lived in pitch black and were provided only with dirty water for drinking. But nothing compared to the inmates endured. There was a ring that hung from the ceiling that they would be hung from in different positions for hours on end while being required to stay awake or risk being beaten. Soud received broken bones and said that if you refused to talk, they would lock you inside a box until you suffocate from lack of oxygen and gave in. The list of the atrocities is practically endless, and I hope to God that exposing this facility forced some kind of regulation to these interrogations. And last up, in our number 1 spot, the Tuol Sleng Genocide Museum. Back in 1975, after their victory in the Cambodian Civil War, the Khmer regime commandeered what was once a high school in Phnom Penh into the notorious Security 21 prison. Encased in electrified barbed wire, the classrooms were converted into tiny prison cells and chambers where some of the most cruel and barbaric torture in history would take place. Between 1975 to the fall of Khmer Rouge in 1979, it's estimated 20,000 people were imprisoned at S21, and at least 18,000 of those inmates died while being tortured. The system at the facility was designed to make anyone confess to whatever crimes they were charged with by their captors, regardless of age, gender, or actual culpability. Victims of the prison were routinely beaten, given electric shocks, burned, and strangled, but it could be even worse. Those that didn't give in as easily would be slashed or even suffocated with plastic bags, and in some cases, they would even pull out fingernails and pour alcohol in the open wound or waterboard their prisoners. Plus, if you were a female, it was all too common for interrogators to take advantage of you. They then paired all this endless with forced sleep deprivation, and there was a medical unit where they would experiment and torture live inmates with no anesthesia. Thankfully, the cruel Khmer Rouge were defeated, and in 1980, the government reopened the building, having converted it into a memorial museum for the lives lost to these barbaric torture. Coming in at number 10 is the Melon Heads. It's said if you drive through Lake County, Ohio late at night and happen to see something that resembles a pack of people with huge heads staring at you from the tall grass, you may have stumbled across the Melon Heads of Ohio. Allegedly, the government ran a number of experiments which eventually left a group of humans with heads swelled to enormous sizes. Now obviously, the government found little to do with these now deformed people, so the story goes that they got dumped off in the woods near Kirtland, Ohio, not far from Cleveland. But because every story gets retold, more paranormal theories have been proposed about the Melon Heads. Some believe them to be the ghosts of young subjects who burned to death in a cabin fire. Now it's said that they were subjected to tests by a man named Dr. Crow, whose work caused their heads to inflate to their larger size. Now regardless of their origins, the Melon Heads get sighted most at Windsor Road, where many high schoolers go and attempt to witness them firsthand. Now to me, that sounds absolutely terrifying, and if I ever go to Ohio, I will be avoiding that area completely. Number 9. Helltown. With a name like Helltown, it's no shock that this town had terrible things happen. Founded in 1806, Boston Village's original claim to fame was its standing as the oldest village in Summit County. But in 1974, it became the unlucky victim of nationwide anxiety over the county's disappearing forest land. The land was then given to the National Park Services, and they decided it'd be home to a new park. The government began buying the properties of its longtime residents, and then, of course, the government quickly fell behind on its plan to create the park, and the village sat neglected. Now the hellish aura of the area only continued to grow when they also acquired the Kredgy dump in 1985. Rangers visiting the site became ill and covered in rashes. It was soon discovered that the dump was highly polluted with toxic chemicals improperly disposed of. Also in the village there is a church, which is said to have been built by Satanists, complete with upside down crosses. There's an abandoned bus that is said to be the host of lingering ghosts, and there is the talk of mutants who were created by the chemical spill, including the monstrous snake known as the Peninsula Python. Number 8. The Butcher of Kingsbury Run. The Butcher of Kingsbury Run was an identified serial slayer who was active in Cleveland, Ohio in the 1930s. The deaths are characterized by the dismemberment of 13 known victims and the disposal of their remains in the impoverished neighborhood of Kingsbury Run. Now most victims came from an area east of Kingsbury Run called the Roaring Third or Hobo Jungle, known for its bars, gambling, dens, brothels, and vagrants. Now many of the victims remain unidentified to this day, and despite an investigation of the deaths, which at one time was led by famed lawman Elliot Ness, then Cleveland's public safety director, the criminal responsible was never apprehended. Now recent speculation suggests that the butcher may have traveled west and was also responsible for the death of Elizabeth Short of the Black Dahlia murder case. Number 7. Assassinations. There are a lot of different events that have happened in the world that have resulted in important figures passing away, but they may not all be accidents. On November 22, 1963, President John F. Kennedy was in Texas on a political trip to smooth over frictions in the Democratic Party between liberals and conservatives. Traveling in a presidential motorcade through downtown Dallas, he was assassinated, hit once in the back and once in the head. Kennedy was taken to Parkland Hospital for emergency medical treatment, where he was pronounced dead 30 minutes later at 1 p.m. Lee Harvey Oswald was charged with Kennedy's assassination, which he denied. Oswald was then assassinated as well soon after, and this assassination spawned numerous conspiracy theories. These theories alleged the involvement of the CIA, the Mafia, Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson, Cuban Prime Minister Fidel Castro, the KGB, or some combination of these individuals and entities. The original FBI investigation and Warren Commission report, as well as an alleged benign CIA cover-up, have led to the claim that the federal government deliberately covered up crucial information in the aftermath of the assassination. Number 6. Secret societies. Many people believe that there are secret societies that rule the world, like the Illuminati, but what if I told you there actually is a society like that? It's called the Blindenberg Group, and it's an annual off-the-record forum established in 1954 to create a dialogue between Europe and North America. The group's agenda agenda, originally to prevent another world war, is now defined as bolstering a consensus around free market Western capitalism and its interests around the globe. Participants include political leaders, experts, captains of industry, finance, academia, numbering between 100 and 150 people. Afterwards, attendees are entitled to use information gained at the meetings, but not to attribute it to a named speaker. Now, the group states the purpose of this is to encourage candid debate while at the same time maintaining privacy. Now, with all the secrecy around this, it's no wonder it left many people creating conspiracy theories around it. Number 5. Unethical practices. We all know behind closed doors the government has unethical practices. Now, one of the most shocking and dark things they do is human experimentation, especially when they don't tell the subjects that they are being experimented on. Operation Midnight Climax was an operation carried out by the CIA as a subproject of Project MKUltra, the mind control research program that began in the 1950s. Now, it was later established in 1954 by Dr. Sidney Gottlieb and placed under the direction of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics in Boston, Massachusetts. Now, under the Cold War and fears of Soviet Union and China, Dr. Sidney felt inspired to investigate methods of mind control. Operation Midnight Climax gave him permission to test drugs on unknowing citizens. So essentially, the government hired sex workers to dose their clients with LSD for mind control research purposes. Now, official results of these experiments were not released, but accounts from supervisors of the experiments give little insight to the findings. No one knows where the subjects are now or what effects they may have suffered. Operation Midnight Climax is considered to be so secretive that few people, even in the highest government positions, knew Dr. Sidney existed, let alone was conducting these experiments. Number 4. Surveillance state. The practice of mass surveillance in the United States dates back to wartime monitoring and censorship of international communications from to or which passed through the United States. After the First and Second World Wars, mass surveillance continued throughout the Cold War period via programs such as Black Chamber and Project Shamrock. Following the September 11th attacks of 2001, domestic and international mass surveillance capabilities grew immensely. As time has gone on, surveillance has just increased with the rise of computers and phones. As worldwide sales of smartphones began exceeding those of feature phones, the NSA decided to take advantage of the smartphone boom. With phones, they could access social contacts, user behavior, interests, location, photos, and credit card numbers and passwords. Now, have you ever been talking about a product to a friend and then a few days later you get ads for that product? Yep, it's because they're always listening. Number 3. Aliens Black Budget Projects. Area 51, a highly classified US Air Force facility, is at the center of numerous conspiracy theories. Explore claims about black budget projects, including advanced military technologies and experimental aircrafts, and discuss how the secrecy surrounding these initiatives fuels speculation about extraterrestrial involvement. Now, not to mention, Navy pilots have come out recently to speak about 2 experiences they had with real UFOs. 2 of them were interviewed by 60 Minutes on CBS News about a UFO sighting over the Pacific Ocean in 2004. Commander Dave Fravor and Lieutenant Commander Alex Dietrich spotted the unidentified object during training exercises but were unable to classify it. Dave described it as a little white tic-tac looking object, adding that it lacked conventional exhaust plumes and had no wings or visible markings. It also moved erratically, the pilot said. Dave described the 2004 encounter, calling the object the strangest, most obscure thing I've ever seen flying. As soon as we look down, we see the white water, and then we see this little white tic-tac. It's pointing north-south, and it's just going forward, back, left, and right, he said, adding that it was bouncing around like a ping-pong ball. Dave said he approached the mysterious object to take a closer look, and it began mirroring his movements. Then when the pilot got to within a half a mile of the UFO, it suddenly vanished. Now, there are other stories like this too, which is just crazy, and the higher-ups knows there's aliens, and they've been hiding it from us for a long time. Number 2. Suppressed technologies. Nikola Tesla, a brilliant inventor, is often associated with suppressed technologies. Tesla's innovations, such as wireless energy transmission and free energy concepts, have sparked theories suggesting that his work was intentionally buried to maintain the status quo. Then there's a car that ran on water that was also reportedly suppressed. The water fuel cell is a technical design of perpetual motion machine created by Stanley Allen Mayer. Stanley claimed that a car retrofitted provided with the device could use water as fuel instead of gasoline. He said that the vehicle could go 845 miles until it needed to be filled up again. Now this would be a great feat as it would be better for the environment, but it wouldn't be good for oil corporations as they would lose money. Then Stanley died, and people truly think that he was assassinated. He died suddenly on March 20th, 1998 while dining at a restaurant. His brother claimed that during a meeting with two Belgian investors, Stanley suddenly ran outside saying they poisoned me. Now after an investigation, the Grove City Police agreed with the Franklin County coroner report that ruled that Stanley, who had a high blood pressure, died of a cerebral aneurysm, but some of Stanley's supporters believe that he was assassinated to suppress his inventions. And coming at number 1 is government cover-ups. One of the most well-known government cover-ups was the Watergate scandal. It's a prime example of government cover-ups at the highest levels. Members of the Nixon administration attempted to cover up their involvement in a break-in at the Democratic National Committee headquarters in the Watergate complex. Now the cover-up ultimately led to President Richard Nixon's resignation in 1974, as it was revealed that he had knowledge of and participated in efforts to obstruct justice. Then there's the Tuskegee Syphilis Study, which was a long-running research program conducted by the U.S. Public Health Service. The study involved withholding treatment from African American men infected with syphilis to observe the natural progression of the disease. The participants were not informed of the true nature of the study and were denied appropriate medical care. Now the cover-up continued for 4 decades until it was exposed by the media, leading to public outrage and changes in research ethic regulations. Now these are just 2 examples, but there's unfortunately many more.
And we're starting off the list with a myth about the Titanic. Myth might be the wrong word, it's more of a misunderstanding. Basically what we were taught to believe is that the ship hit an iceberg, the majority of it being concealed under the water. It was much larger than they thought, and it caused a significant damage, leading to the sinking of the ship. Now, this part is actually true, of course, but the iceberg may not have been the sole cause of the tragedy. Recent investigations have suggested that a fire on board may have played a major role in weakening the structure of the ship beforehand. There was apparently a coal bunker fire which had been burning in one of the ship's coal storage rooms for several days, and this might have compromised the Titanic's structural integrity. Fire, it was not uncommon at the time because of the spontaneous combustion of coal dust in the bunker, and the prolonged exposure to high temperatures could have weakened the bulkhead of the ship, making it more vulnerable to the impact of the iceberg. Basically, the fire might have accelerated the sinking process. If you are enjoying our channel so far, then please let us know down in the comments, hit the subscribe button, share, do all the things. Really helps us out. And at number 9, we have witches being burnt at the stake during the Salem witch trials and other witch fiascos going on across America at the time. Now, while those who were believed to be witches were tried unfairly and sentenced to death, they were actually hanged, not burnt alive. I think the visual of, an unfairly accused woman burning to death on a stake is just a more sensational visual than someone just hanging from a rope. Burning alive just plays better in movies and artwork. And aside from the visual, it would also be a far more horrific way to die. It's not like being burnt at the stake came out of nowhere, though. There are instances of it happening, just not in the United States. Accused witches in France were often burnt, and during the witch hysteria in the United States, townspeople would burn the bodies of the accused witches after they had been hanged in order to make sure they were gone for good. Didn't want like a Michael Myers situation happening, I guess. Next up, we have the War of the Worlds broadcast. This was always a story I thought was so fascinating and just kind of nuts. I believe this till fairly recently, actually, and I kind of feel bad about bursting everyone's bubble here. So the story goes that in 1938, Orson Welles made his famous War of the Worlds radio play, and when it was broadcast across America, people thought it was so realistic sounding. They'd never heard anything like it before, and people actually started to panic, thinking aliens were really attacking the Earth. In reality, things weren't actually this out of hand. I imagine some people were pretty shook, but for the most part, just wasn't the case. CBS Radio made several disclaimers throughout, reassuring listeners that the broadcast was fictional. So where did this mass hysteria story come from? Well, newspapers at the time did actually report that people panicked, but they knew what they were doing. They were playing it up in an attempt to discredit the radio. Look how untrustworthy the radio is. It caused mass hysteria for no reason. Newspapers were worried back then that the radio was going to completely take over and they'd be out of jobs. Kind of nuts that that didn't actually happen until the early 2000s when the internet started becoming more commonplace.
Number 7. The Circleville Letter Writer. In the 1970s, residents of a small town of Circleville and Pickaway County started receiving personal, mysterious letters about their lives. Now, the letters were written in block style and contained vindictive, violent, and often vulgar material. School bus driver Mary Glipsy became the main target of the letters. The writer accused Mary, who was married, to having an affair with a married school superintendent, Gordon Massey. Now, the letters sent to Mary didn't stop, and they became increasingly threatening. Her husband, Ronald Glipsy, began receiving them too. Then in August 1977, Ronald died, and it was unknown whether the death was accidental or a homicide, but it was believed the letters were related to his death. The letters continued even after a suspect was placed in prison, and the letters continued to arrive in residents' mailboxes, both city officials and average citizens alike, until the late 90s. The writer was never revealed, and it remains an Ohio mystery to this day. Number 6. The Legend of Elizabeth's Grave. This infamous legend starts at Mount Union Pleasant Valley Cemetery, one of the most haunted cemeteries in Ohio. The rural cemetery is home to the chilling Elizabeth's grave. Now, there are two major stories to Elizabeth's legend. In the first, Elizabeth, overcome with grief over the death of her husband, hanged herself from a tree near the rear of the cemetery in which her husband was buried. In another variation, Elizabeth had her life ended in a similar manner by several men angry over her inheritance upon her husband's death. Now, in both legends, the story goes that Elizabeth was buried near the front of the cemetery. However, her tombstone mysteriously moves itself to the back of the cemetery near the location of her death, most often against the very tree from which she hung. When replaced, it would always wander back to the rear of the cemetery. Now, that's not all. It's rumored that Elizabeth still walks the cemetery, often seen in a white dress. A few people claim that apparitions of Elizabeth are accompanied by the apparitions of two shadowy men dressed in all black. Sometimes she's seen hanging from the tree where she lost her life, and some even say that on the anniversary of her death, blood drips from the tree in question. Number 5. Eugene the Mummy. An African-American man in his mid to late 40s was found dead from natural charges on a road near Sabina in Ohio. He was alone and without identification, believed to be a wanderer in search of a job. Townspeople claim to have seen him walking in town the day before, appearing to be ill. The only things in his pocket were $1.40 and a slip of paper with the address 1118 Yale Avenue, Cincinnati. Upon investigation, authorities arrived at the address only to find a vacant lot. The identity of the man was still a complete mystery, so they decided that the name of a nearby neighbor, Eugene, would work for the time being, at least until they figured out who he was. This man, now named Eugene, was brought to Sabina's Littleton funeral home and embalmed. They then set the mummified man in a brick shed near a bus stop so that people could come by and identify the body. Now, the typical 30-day period of viewing passed with no luck, but pretty soon though, Eugene became a permanent resident of Sabina. He just sat there on the side of the road for years. Now, the town loved what they called their town mascot, and Eugene had a couch to rest on, was dusted and cleaned, and his clothes were changed when they got dingy. Over a period of 35 years, it is estimated that Sabina's mummy man was viewed by 1.5 million people, but he's still never been identified. Now, I'm sorry, I can't believe they were able to do that. That is sick. Number 4. Moonville Tunnel. Located deep in the woods, the Moonville Tunnel is framed by faded stone archways covered in moss. Now, the tunnel itself is long and extremely dark, and it's actually an out-of-work stretch of railroad track that leads to an old coal mining town, and of course, It's haunted. Now, the most infamous Moonville ghost story originated in 1880 when engineer Theodore Lawhead was driving a train down the dark, desolate tracks from Cincinnati to Moretta when another train unexpectedly collided with his. This was apparently a train dispatcher's mistake, and Theodore and a fireman died instantly. As early as 1895, ghost stories about a figure thought to be Theodore, holding a bright white lantern with a flowing white beard, eyes that glistened like balls of fire, and a halo of twinkling stars, would appear and just as quickly disappear. In addition to the engineer, Moonville is supposedly haunted by a railway brakeman who looms in the tunnel, a woman who smells like lavender, and a bully named Baldy Keaton who has been known to throw rocks and tease people. Number 3. Beaver Creek State Park. This park is special because of its history of being a canal system in the 1800s, with locks that still remain in the park. One of them, called Jake's Lock, is said to be haunted by Jake, a canal worker who was struck by lightning while walking across the top. Many other legends exist within the park, including the tale of Esther Hale, known as the Bride of the Bridge. On the morning of her wedding, someone was sent to check on the groom to find that his house was empty and he was never seen again. Esther, grieving for months wondering what happened to her soon-to-be husband, was then found dead in her home. According to the book Haunted Ohio II, it's said by the locals that you can still see her dressed in white, looking for her bridegroom on the bridge over Beaver Creek. She waits there every year on August 12th, a hideous figure in tattered white satin and lace, and if she touches you, she will become young and beautiful again, but you will die. Number 2. Malabar Farm. Malabar Farm was built in 1939 by Pulitzer Prize winning author Louis Broomfield, and it was his home until his death in 1956. But before it was built, another family lived there in the 19th century. Celie Rose, who lived there, was said to be half child and half woman, according to an 1896 newspaper article. Now, she was infatuated with a boy named Guy Barry who lived in a neighboring farmhouse. They saw each other every day, but her parents told her to stay away from him. Now she didn't like that and got angry at them, so she mixed rat poison in their porridge. Her father and brother died, but her mother survived. She was found not guilty by reason of insanity and went to live with her mother. Celie then poisoned her again, and this time it worked. At age 23, Celie stood trial, truly alone, but was found not guilty by reason of insanity and sent to a state hospital. She lived out the rest of her life at an insane asylum, and since then the house has been haunted. One visitor saw a woman dressed like Celie Rose outside the house. People have seen lights flicker, felt a phantom cat, disembodied voices are heard, and there's an overall eerie feeling on the property. And coming in at number 1 is the Franklin Castle. The Franklin Castle is arguably the most haunted house in Ohio due to the Tideman's family's tragic past. Hans Tideman, a German immigrant and co-founder of Union Banking and Savings Co., built the home in 1881. His first wife, Louisa, died inside Franklin Castle in the 1890s, and he would eventually bury 3 more of his children and his mother. Since then, the location has been the site of mysterious hauntings. A family with 6 children called the Romanos had moved into the house, and on the day they moved in, 2 of their children said they'd encouraged a crying girl while on the 3rd floor. Now, they kept having a bunch of paranormal experiences, and a priest advised the Romanos to move out, and in 1974 they did. But the hauntings didn't stop when the Romanos left. From there, the house was sold again and again and again. Each new occupant reported strange occurrences like passing through odd vapors, hearing a child crying, or seeing a woman in black standing in the window.